Hello, friends. What Trump is doing today must be astonishing to the entire planet. See for yourself. Trump has just become president. Right off the bat, he's introducing an executive order withdrawing the US from the World Health Organization, from the Paris Agreement. Introduces an executive order to de-recognize any gender other than male and female. Banned transgender people from competing against women. Led an executive order withdrawing the US from the UN Human Rights Council. In effect, he's eliminating an organization like USAID. I'll talk more about that next. Trump is threatening to withdraw from the World Trade Organization, stops all financial aid to foreign countries for 90 days. The new US Secretary of State Rubio began repeating Vladimir Putin's talking points almost verbatim. A multipolar world is fine. A unipolar one led by the US was an anomaly after the Cold War. China, Russia, and even Iran with North Korea are defending their national interests, and the US should defend its interests too. We will have to return to a multipolar world.
For the world to simply have a unipolar power, that was an anomaly. It was the product of the end of the Cold War. But eventually you were going to reach back to a point where you had a multipolar world, great powers in different parts of the...
Parallel to that, Trump wants to take over Canada, Greenland, the Panama Canal, even the Gaza Strip. He's changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Imposes duties on goods from Canada, Mexico, China. Is going to impose duties on the European Union. That is, Trump is not bashing. He is just bashing the closest US allies and anyone else he can reach. He's breaking everything that's been sacred to the West lately. Well, remember, one of the main bikes about global warming, for criticizing which Google even deletes your account. So it's a sacred cow for the West. It's very, very important to all the EU, US, and liberal politicians. Because of this global warming, they began to compulsorily force everyone to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to switch to green energy. Laws were passed because of this threat. They dragged an inadequate girl to the UN to cry and tell her how carbon dioxide bothers her. Bill Gates even wants to ban cows from farting. That is, everything is very serious. To save the planet, the West is going and writing new rules for the whole world to reduce CO2 emissions. It's the Paris Accords. And what does Trump do? He's pulling out of those Paris Accords. The USAID organization. This is an organization that is all over the world promoting US interests, grooming a fifth column in these countries, and writes the laws that the US needs. Well, as an example, in Russia, they helped to write the colonial constitution of 1993, which is indicated on their official website. And this office, Trump and Musk essentially dissolved. Next. Liberalism, individual liberty, LGBT+. Well, that's generally been the holiest thing for Europe and the US lately. What is Trump doing? He's enshrined two genders in US law, male and female. Another very important thing. Unipolar world equals American empire, and Trump's man is saying that this is an anomaly, and that it is logical that China, Russia, and other countries will fight for sovereignty. So it turns out to be bees versus honey. Well, or Trump, like Gorbachev, is breaking his own empire. Duties on our closest allies. But think about it. Trump is going to impose duties on the European Union. He already did against Canada and Mexico. And remember, before that, the United States convinced Europeans for a very long time that if they increase their consumption of Russian gas, they will become dependent on Russia. And in this case, Putin will be able to put pressure on Europe and manipulate it. What is Trump doing today? He is not pressuring. He is just crushing those who have been made dependent on the United States for decades. In general, Trump is lawless. There was an interesting comment on the news that the US has withdrawn from the UNHRC and that Trump is talking about taking over the Gaza Strip from where he will evict all Palestinians. Well, Putin says, explain something. The new regions are historical lands. We have a constitution there, Russian language. Many Russians live there. Well, you can add about denazification, demilitarization. So Putin is constantly explaining his actions. And what does Trump do? He just annexes half the globe. Just like that. He doesn't care about all the international rules. So what's going on in the world? Why is Trump acting like a classic gangster, breaking much of what the US has spent decades building? Well, and it's pretty simple here, folks. To understand what's going on, you need to know a few important points. The first is that the collective West became developed through centuries of robbing the entire world. Second, in the 90s, after the collapse of the USSR, the West and the US at the head became the only leaders, and the world became unipolar. And the third, the main instrument by which the US robs the whole world, is the US dollar. As long as these positions were not changed, the West lived amicably, and everyone got something from the loot. There was a hierarchy and stability. Naturally, if this stability had remained, Trump and his ideas would not have been even close to running the country. So something is broken in that system. And yes, friends, things are changing dramatically today. And there's even more to it than that. Today's time is compared to the 1920s of the 20th century. This is the period of World War I and World War II. But with the remark that today's time is much more serious. The difference is that back then it was a structural global crisis, whereas now it's a systemic civilizational one. Many authoritative researchers, scientists, politicians, and political analysts are talking about this, so trust me, it's a widely discussed topic.
They all say that the existing model of capitalism, which is the basis of social structure in the vast majority of countries today, has exhausted itself. Within its framework, there is no way out of the tangle of increasingly complicated contradictions. The crisis we are dealing with is conceptual, even civilizational.
So, it is very important to know that the current system has outlived itself, and something else is taking its place. It's always been clear that capitalism is finite. Well, why, I've already given an example. Imagine there is a capitalist who takes the excess profits for himself, and there are workers who produce goods and from its sale receive wages. But to whom are these goods sold? The goods are sold to the same workers. But no matter how you look at it, workers can't constantly buy back all the goods and services they produce themselves. Because firstly, they are worth more than they earn, because their own enterprises take the lion's share of earnings for themselves. And secondly, not all people are in a hurry to part with money. Well, let's say they save money. Now back to Trump. What is his position? He is in a position where his empire, the unipolar world, is crumbling, when it becomes more and more difficult to rob other countries, when the era of capitalism is passing, and even China is on its heels. He understands perfectly well that the world is changing, that all the rules will soon stop working. All these WTO, Paris agreements, no one will pay attention to them. And he, while still having the power, decided to take the first step, ignore all the rules and knock out a better place for his country in the new world order. Again, if we talk about sales markets, cheap resources and labor, then all this should have ended for the West in the 90s. But they were saved by the collapse of the Soviet Union. They pulled back their end. But the time came when the resources of the Soviet Union ran out for them, and the West, like a pack of hungry dogs with no other choice, began to fight among themselves. In conditions where there was no one to devour, they began to devour each other. Before the war, a report by the Rent Agency was published recommending that Europe, especially Germany, be cut off from cheap Russian energy in order to encourage the transfer of European industry to the United States. To do this, it was necessary to start a war and impose sanctions, which was done. That is, the United States began to devour its allies in this way. But the Biden administration did it more or less gently, maintaining the appearance that nothing in the world was changing, that there are no problems. But there are problems. If we take the United States, then their real GDP today is less than the GDP of the Soviet Union before the collapse. The USSR had 14%. That is, the United States has less today. But after the Second World War, the US GDP was more than half of the global total. But do you see the dynamics? The United States is deteriorating. Nobody needs their goods. Some Chinese, Indian, Vietnamese. They are already better and cheaper. There is also a clear trend towards de-dollarization, that is, the world's abandonment of the dollar. The United States has a huge external debt, which requires more and more money to service it. There's $1 trillion a year in debt service alone, and there will be more every year. This is not to mention paying off this debt at all. And by the way, when Trump says, "Let's make America great again," he's referring specifically to the post-war times. Back then, yes, they were indeed very powerful. They had all the gold, the whole economy. But they can't hold the whole world today. And that's why the United States withdrew from Afghanistan. Trump is going to withdraw from Syria and other places. That is, the United States is withdrawing from many parts of the world because they are running out of steam. It's elementary here. Remember how the whole world treated the USA and Europe 10 years ago? Well, with a kind of breathlessness, really like a kind of metropolis, a blooming garden. It was a model to follow. And now what is Europe? The leaders are flawed, the economy is deteriorating, the population is too, the cities are dirty. The trend is the same in the United States, but they still consume a lot because of their more advantageous position in the hierarchy. But nevertheless, they began to be challenged. The same BRICS organization. And by the way, BRICS has already surpassed the entire collective West in economic weight. In the 90s, the US budget could have allowed for 2 regional wars. In the 2000s, 1, and now none. Therefore, Trump, as a kind of crisis manager, is curtailing many foreign policy projects, such as, say, USAID, assistance to other countries, and now he wants to focus on his industry so that the country can have its own production during these wild changes. That's why he first set his sights on his region, Canada, Mexico, and the Panama Canal. This is an important sea route for the United States, allowing crossing from the west coast to the east coast and vice versa. Otherwise, they would have had to circumnavigate South America. This is very important for Trump right now. All these globalist projects can be forgotten. As you know, the United States has long been dominated by two development paths. These are ultra-globalist, conditionally such a Democratic Party, and globalist, conditionally the Republican Party. The United States no longer has the strength for ultra-globalism. Therefore, Trump was allowed to implement a globalist project where there are several centers of power. That is, the world will definitely be multipolar. And the United States is one of its main centers. That's what Trump is doing all this for. While Europe and other vassals of the United States live in an ultra-globalist project, Trump is rebuilding the world, trying to run into a new world order first and take a better place. The only thing analysts are focusing on is that Trump seems more like he can than he really is. He's trying to intimidate, pressure, and deceive everyone quickly to get them to agree with him. In fact, he doesn't have the resources to do what he's talking about. There are practically duties against all countries. But this is not serious. If he does, the United States will be the first to collapse. He's bluffing, he's trying to intimidate and bend everyone. It works with someone, but in the long run, everyone will see that he will turn out to be a simple babbler. As for Russia and Ukraine, Ukraine is needed to weaken Russia. It is an ultra-globalist project. In other cases, why would the United States want to fight Russia? Well, to spend tens of billions of dollars on this war. To do what? The main enemy for the United States today is China. They're economically taking over the world and is displacing the United States. China genuinely aspires to global dominance in this regard. That's why Trump went ahead and put duties on Chinese goods, not Russian goods. Russia does not claim world leadership and does not squeeze markets like China. China is economically conquering the world, while Russia is only seeking a sphere of influence around its borders. This poses no threat to the US. Yes, Russia is the leader of a liberationist world movement from a unipolar world. But Trump's team has already agreed to bury this world and create something new. A new world order. And the Western media are already writing that Putin, Trump, and Xi Jinping are going to hold a new Yalta. But there is a danger here for Russia. If Trump backs down on Ukraine, it would send a signal to the rest of the world that he may surrender his positions. So Trump will resist here. And as much as possible, will try to make peace on his interests. For Russia, on the other hand, it is logical to categorically defend all Soviet territory, because Putin will be talking to a senile hegemon, and he is not so scary anymore, because he already has a huge mass of other worries, and since all possible sanctions have already been imposed. What can they do? Nothing. Only shake the air. Putin, of course, knows this, and, of course, will take it into account and defend his interests to the maximum extent possible. Well, that's how it is. We live in interesting times, friends. That's the way it is, and that's all for now.